A single blow. That's all it took to shatter a 20-year marriage, dismantle a corporate empire, and turn a quiet society wife into a legend. It wasn't a blow to the powerful Richard Ashford, nor to his stunning young companion flaunting her new diamond earrings. No, in the glittering heart of Manhattan's most exclusive gala, the world-renowned jeweler Antoine Dubois bowed to the one person no one saw coming, Richard's wife. And in that moment of silent deference, a devastating secret was revealed, not with a shout, but with the brilliant, cold fire of diamonds meant for another. This is the story of how the quietest woman in the room became the most powerful. The penthouse on Park Avenue was a monument to success, or at least to Richard Ashford's version of it. Spanning the entire top floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, the city lights glittering below like a carpet of scattered jewels. To visitors it was breathtaking. To Caroline Ashford, after 20 years, it felt like a beautifully appointed observation deck from which she was meant to watch the world, but never truly touch it. The air was always recycled, the temperature a constant controlled 72 degrees, and the silence was deep, punctuated only by the distant muted hum of the city that was her home, but not her playground. Caroline stood before one of these vast windows, a glass of Sancerre in her hand, watching the river of headlights flow down the avenue. She was elegant, with a quiet grace that was often mistaken for fragility. Her silver blonde hair was pulled into a sophisticated chignon, and her simple navy silk dress spoke of a wealth so profound it had no need to shout. She had been the perfect corporate wife, the consummate hostess, the silent partner in the brand that was the Ashfords. But lately the silence had begun to feel less like peace, and more like an erasure. Richard entered the living room, loosening the knot of his Brioni tie. He was a handsome man, his features sharp, and his hair still thick and dark, with distinguished streaks of grey at the temples. He moved with the unshakable confidence of a man who had built an empire, Ashford Equity, a private equity firm that devoured and restructured companies with brutal efficiency. Long Day, he announced, not as a conversation starter, but as a declaration. He walked directly to the crystal decanter of scotch, pouring a generous measure into a heavy tumbler. He didn't ask about her day. He never did any more. It sounded it, Caroline replied, her voice soft. Thomas Sterling called earlier. He mentioned the Horizon deal was hitting some turbulence. Richard took a sip of his scotch, his eyes narrowing slightly. Thomas talks too much. It's handled. The subtext was clear. This is my world. You are not a part of it. It hadn't always been this way. She remembered the early days in their cramped two-bedroom apartment when her MBA from Wharton was just as valuable as his ambition. She'd helped him craft his first business plans, vetted his early investors, and celebrated every small victory with cheap champagne and shared dreams. But as the money grew, her role shrank. He had gently, lovingly, and systematically pushed her out of the boardroom and into the ballroom, recasting her from a partner into a hostess. Her insights were now sweet suggestions, her financial acumen a cute hobby. Our anniversary is on Friday, she said, changing the subject, turning from the window to face him. 20 years. I was thinking perhaps we could go back to that little Italian place in the village where you proposed. Just the two of us. Richard swirled the amber liquid in his glass. The gala for the Children's Foundation is on Friday, Caroline. I sit on the board. We have to be there. I've already bought a table. Of course, a public performance of their perfect marriage rather than a private celebration of it. The disappointment was a familiar ache, dull and persistent. I see. Well, perhaps we can celebrate on Saturday instead. We'll see. Things are hectic right now. He gestured vaguely with his glass. Don't worry about a gift for me. I've got myself something. As for you, he said, a patronizing smile touching his lips. Just tell my assistant what you'd like. Set a budget, of course. Something reasonable. The word stung more than he could possibly know. A budget. Reasonable. As if she were a child asking for an allowance. He had no idea about the inheritance her grandfather, a shrewd shipping magnate, had left her. He'd always dismissed it as her little nest egg. He had no clue that for the past 15 years, while he was building his public empire, she had been quietly, brilliantly building her own, in the shadows, turning her inheritance into a fortune that would make his eyes water. She managed her portfolio with a skill that would have made him an industry legend, but she did it in silence, under her maiden name, Beaumont. It was the one part of her life that was still truly hers. I was actually looking at a pair of earrings, she said, testing the waters, her voice even. At Dubois & Co., a stunning pair emerald-cut diamonds. They're calling them the Starlight Cascades. Richard scoffed a short, dismissive sound. Dubois? Carolyn, his pieces are museum quality. They start at 7 figures. That's not reasonable. That's an asset acquisition. Let's be sensible. Get a nice necklace from Tiffany's. Classic. Elegant. You. The word hung in the air. He meant it as a compliment, but to her it meant predictable safe and passionless. The woman who wanted the Starlight Cascades was not the woman he saw. He saw a placeholder, an accessory. He had no idea that the woman standing before him could buy Dubois & Co. itself, if she felt so inclined. Later that night, as she lay in their cold, cavernous bedroom, she heard the telltale signs she had been ignoring for months. The soft ping of his phone from the ensuite bathroom, where he'd gone to check emails. The low murmur of his voice, too quiet to be a business call. The way he angled the phone away from her when he finally came back to bed. The scent on his jacket when he came home late wasn't the stale air of the boardroom, but a faint floral perfume that wasn't hers. Denial was a warm, heavy blanket, and she had been hiding under it for a long time. But tonight, Richard's casual dismissal of her, of their anniversary, had pulled the blanket away, leaving her shivering in the cold, hard truth. The gilded cage had never felt more like a prison, and for the first time, in a very long time, Caroline Ashford began to think not about how to redecorate it, but how to escape. And she knew, with the chilling certainty of a woman whose intelligence had been underestimated for far too long, that the key to her escape wasn't in a quiet departure, but in a spectacular, calculated detonation. The days leading up to the anniversary gala were a masterclass in domestic theatre. On the surface, everything was perfect. Caroline approved the caterers for an upcoming dinner party. She consulted with the florist about centerpieces for the gala table, and she smiled placidly when Richard's assistant, a brisk young woman named Patricia, called to confirm her final dress fitting. She played the part of Mrs. Ashford with an Oscar-worthy performance, her movements fluid and her voice calm. But beneath the serene surface, a storm was gathering. Her mind, once occupied with social calendars and charity committees, was now a whirring engine of observation and deduction. The first concrete clue arrived innocuously tucked into a stack of mail on the antique mahogany credenza in the foyer. It was a credit card statement for an account Richard kept for business incidentals. Usually he had these sent directly to his office, but this one, by some postal fluke, had landed in her hands. Curiosity, a long-dormant instinct, pricked at her. She slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener. The pages were filled with the usual entries: exorbitant steak dinners at Smith & Wollensky, charges from the airport club a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. But then one charge stood out. It was from a boutique she had never heard of, Vixen's Finery. It was not a place where one bought business suits or client gifts. A quick, discreet search on her tablet revealed it specialized in high-end provocative lingerie. The charge was for over $4,000. A cold knot formed in her stomach. It was dated 2 weeks ago, the day Richard had claimed to be stuck in an all-night negotiation with a firm from Singapore. The digital breadcrumbs were easier to follow. She didn't need to break into his phone. His carelessness was its own confession. He had linked his personal cloud account to the family's central home server years ago for photo sharing. He had long forgotten it, but she had not. Late one night, when the deep, even rhythm of his breathing assured her he was asleep, she opened her laptop. With a few clicks, she accessed the photo stream. It was mostly innocuous golf trips, blurry shots of cityscapes from airplane windows. But as she scrolled back, a new folder appeared, one he'd clearly created on his phone and forgotten was syncing. It was titled simply SV. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she clicked. The images that filled the screen were a visceral blow. They were of a young woman impossibly beautiful in a fierce, obvious way. Her hair was a cascade of fiery red curls, her lips full, her eyes alight with a brazen confidence. In some photos she was posing in a restaurant, a glass of champagne in hand. In others she was laughing, head thrown back, in what looked like the passenger seat of Richard's Bentley. And in one, a selfie, she was wearing a slinky black lace garment that Caroline recognized instantly from the Vixen's Finery website. The woman was looking at the camera with a possessive, triumphant smirk. In the background, out of focus but unmistakable, was the headboard of a hotel bed. The St. Regis. Richard had stayed there last month, citing a plumbing emergency in their building that had never occurred. Caroline felt the air leave her lungs a silent, painful gasp. Seeing the evidence was different from suspecting. The whispers in her mind had become a deafening roar. This was Scarlett Vance. She knew the name. She was a junior analyst at a rival firm, known more for her aggressive networking at industry events than her financial acumen. A shark in designer clothing. And she was sleeping with her husband. A call from her closest friend, Jessica Miller, a sharp-witted art gallery owner, came the next afternoon. "Carolyn, darling," Jessica's voice crackled with warmth. "Are you all right? You've been quiet." Caroline hesitated. The lie of "I'm fine," just busy on the tip of her tongue. But the weight of the secret was crushing her. "Jess, can I ask you something? And you have to be brutally honest." "Always?" Jessica replied, her tone instantly shifting to one of concern. "Have you heard anything about Richard?" There was a pause, and in that silence, Caroline found her answer. "What have you heard?" She pressed her voice, trembling slightly. Jessica sighed. "I didn't want to be the one to say anything. I saw him about a month ago at Balthazar. He was with a woman, a redhead. They were very close. I hoped it was a client, but her hand was on his thigh and he wasn't moving it. Caroline, I'm so sorry." The confirmation felt like a final turning of the screw, tightening the band of ice around her heart. The pain was immense, a physical ache that radiated through her chest. But as the initial shock subsided, something else began to crystallize in its place: rage. A cold, clear, and utterly focused rage. She had cried in this marriage before, over loneliness and dismissal. She would not cry over betrayal. Crying was a passive act. Caroline Beaumont was done being passive. That evening she went for a walk, not through the manicured paths of Central Park, but through the vibrant, chaotic streets of the financial district after dark. The towering skyscrapers, symbols of power and ambition, seemed to speak to her. This was the world Richard had claimed as his own, the language he understood. He respected power, profit, and leverage. He had forgotten she could speak that language too. Her objective shifted. It was no longer about confronting him, about tearful accusations and shattered plates. That was the script of a victim. She would write a different script. She needed to know more about the gifts, about the extent of his spending on this woman. She thought of the earrings she'd wanted, the starlight cascades from Dubois. Richard's scoff echoed in her ears. That's not reasonable. That's an asset acquisition. A chilling thought occurred to her. What if he had bought a significant piece of jewelry just not for her? The ultimate insult would be to lavish another woman with the kind of extravagant, passionate gift he had denied his own wife. It was exactly the sort of arrogant cliché move a man like Richard would make. Her destination became clear. The next morning, she would not visit a divorce lawyer. Not yet. She would visit an investment consultant. She would take her little nest egg, her silent, formidable fortune, and she would turn it from a shield into a weapon. Richard had shown her his hand. He had revealed his weakness, a blinding arrogance, and a complete underestimation of the woman who shared his name. He thought he was playing a game of chess against a pawn. He was about to find out he was playing against a queen. Discretion in Manhattan is a commodity bought and sold like any other. Caroline knew the places where the city's elite went to be unseen, the quiet corners of hotel lobby bars, the members-only clubs with unlisted numbers, the restaurants with private rooms and back entrances. Richard, for all his intelligence, was a creature of habit and ego. He would choose a place that was exclusive enough to feel safe, but prestigious enough to impress his conquest. Following her intuition, she started with the King Cole Bar at the St. Regis, the very hotel from Scarlett's incriminating selfie. Dressed in a chic tweed blazer and grey flannel trousers, her hair tucked under a stylish cloche hat, and her face shielded by oversized sunglasses, she looked like any other wealthy woman meeting a friend for afternoon tea. She took a small table in the corner, ordered a chamomile tea she had no intention of drinking, and watched the door. For an hour she saw a parade of the city's power brokers and their companions. Then the door opened, and Richard walked in. He looked relaxed, confident the king in his court. Behind him, Scarlett Vance made her entrance. She was a blaze of color in the dimly lit wood-paneled room, dressed in a tight crimson dress that left little to the imagination. She moved with a feline grace, her eyes sweeping the room as if to ensure everyone was watching. She was not a secret to be kept. She was a trophy to be displayed. They took a secluded booth, but from her vantage point, Caroline had a clear view. She watched as Richard leaned in close, his hand resting possessively on Scarlett's back. She saw the way Scarlett laughed, a throaty, practiced sound, and touched his arm with a familiarity that spoke of countless meetings just like this one. Caroline felt a wave of nausea, but she pushed it down, replacing it with an icy detachment. She was no longer a wife watching her husband's betrayal. She was a strategist, gathering intelligence. The most telling moment came when Scarlett reached into her purse and pulled out a small, dark blue velvet box. It was not a brand Caroline recognized immediately, but it had the unmistakable heft and quality of a high-end jeweler. Scarlett opened it, and though Caroline couldn't see the contents, she saw the gasp of pure, unadulterated avarice on Scarlett's face. She lifted something from the box and held it up to her ear. It glittered, catching the low light of the bar and fracturing it into 1,000 tiny sparks. A diamond. A very large one. Scarlett leaned across the table and kissed Richard, a long theatrical kiss that was meant to be seen. Caroline's hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. The pain was a welcome anchor in the swirling sea of her emotions. She watched for another 10 minutes, imprinting every detail onto her memory. The possessive smiles, the whispered secrets, the casual intimacy of it all. Then, with quiet grace, she placed a $50 bill on the table, stood up and walked out unseen and unnoticed. The cold air on 55th Street was a bracing slap. The charade was over. The truth was laid bare in all its sordid cliché glory. He wasn't just having an affair. He was building a new life, a new image, with a younger, flashier model. He was spending their shared history, their shared fortune on this woman. That night, Caroline didn't sleep. She sat in her private study, the one room in the penthouse that was entirely hers, and she began to work. She opened the encrypted files on her laptop that contained the entirety of her financial world, the Beaumont Trust. It was a labyrinth of stocks, real estate holdings, venture capital investments, and art acquisitions. It was a living, breathing entity, powerful and silent. Richard thought her days were filled with Pilates and lunch dates. In reality, she spent hours in this room on secure lines with brokers in Zurich and Hong Kong, making decisions that he, in his capacity as CEO of Ashford Equity, would have called bold and visionary. She pulled up a file she had created weeks ago, a deep-dive analysis of privately held luxury brands ripe for investment. One name was at the top of her list, Dubois & Co., the very jeweller Richard had dismissed. Her research had told her that Antoine Dubois was a genius, an artist whose medium was precious gems and metals. But he was a poor businessman. His company was solvent, but stagnant, lacking the capital to expand into the lucrative Asian markets or to launch a more accessible pret-a-porter line. He was fiercely protective of his brand's integrity and had rebuffed offers from large, soulless conglomerates. He was looking for a partner, not a predator. A silent investor who respected the art as much as the commerce. The idea that had been a vague notion of revenge began to solidify into a brilliant, audacious plan. It was no longer just about catching Richard. It was about eclipsing him. It was about taking the very symbol of luxury and passion he sought to use as a weapon against her and turning it into her own source of power. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of her laptop. The face looking back was no longer soft or uncertain. The quiet grace was still there, but now it was underpinned by a formidable resolve. Richard had made the critical mistake of every arrogant man. He had confused quietness with weakness. He had mistaken her patience for acquiescence. He was buying scarlet diamonds to show off his power. Caroline was about to show him what real power looked like. It wasn't something you wore on your ears. It was something you owned. The Dubois & Commerce Atelier was not a store. It was a sanctuary. Tucked away on a quiet, cobblestoned street in the West Village, its facade was discreet, marked only by a small burnished brass plaque engraved with the family crest. To enter one had to be buzzed through a heavy oak door. It was a world away from the gleaming, commercialized showrooms of Fifth Avenue. It was a place for connoisseurs, not consumers. Caroline, introducing herself by her maiden name, Ms. Beaumont, had secured a meeting with Antoine Dubois himself. When she entered, she was struck by the quiet reverence of the space. It felt more like a master artist's studio than a place of commerce. Velvet-lined trays held gems that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Intricate designs were sketched out on parchment paper under soft, focused lighting. The air smelled of beeswax and old wood. Antoine Dubois emerged from a workshop in the back. He was a man in his late 60s with kind, discerning eyes behind silver-rimmed spectacles and the long, elegant fingers of a true artisan. He wore a simple black turtleneck and a leather apron. He looked at Caroline not as a potential customer, but as a fellow enthusiast, his gaze taking in her simple but perfectly tailored attire, the lack of ostentatious jewelry, the intelligent curiosity in her eyes. "Miss Beaumont," he said, his voice bearing a soft French accent. "A pleasure. Please come in." He led her to a private viewing room furnished with antique chairs and a single felt-covered table. He did not launch into a sales pitch. Instead, he began to talk about his philosophy. A jewel is not an accessory, he explained, his hands moving with expressive grace. It is a story. It must capture a moment, an emotion. To create a piece like this, he said, gesturing to a breathtaking sapphire and diamond necklace on a display stand, is to translate light memory and passion into something tangible. Most jewelers today, they are merchants. They sell carats and clarity. I sell legacies. Caroline listened, captivated. This was the language she understood. Not the brute force of a corporate takeover that Richard specialized in, but the nuanced, passionate creation of lasting value. She had not come here to buy a necklace. She had come here to buy into his vision. "Mr. Dubois," she began, her voice steady and direct. "Your work is magnificent. It is art of the highest caliber, and I believe it is a story that deserves a much larger audience without losing its soul." His eyes sharpened with interest. "I have read that you are seeking an investment partner to facilitate global expansion," she continued, laying her cards on the table. "I have also read that you have refused offers from several large luxury groups because you fear they will compromise your artistic integrity force mass production and dilute the essence of the Dubois name." "That is all correct," he said, his posture straightening. "They see my name as a brand to be exploited. I see it as my family's heritage." "As do I," Caroline said. "I am not representing a corporation, Mr. Dubois. I am a private investor. I have been managing my own portfolio for nearly 2 decades. My investment philosophy is simple. I partner with genius and provide it with the resources and the freedom to flourish. I am not interested in quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. I am interested in building a 100-year legacy." She proceeded to outline her proposal. It was detailed, insightful, and most importantly, respectful. She spoke of a phased expansion, starting with a flagship atelier in Hong Kong and another in Dubai. She suggested a collaboration with a renowned Parisian design school to foster new talent under his mentorship. She talked about securing exclusive access to rare, ethically sourced gemstones. She spoke his language, the language of art heritage and uncompromising quality, but she backed it up with a financial strategy that was both aggressive and impeccably sound. She proposed to become a silent partner, the majority shareholder, entrusting all creative and operational control to him. Her role would be purely strategic and financial. She would be the unseen force, the quiet power behind the throne. For 2 hours they talked. He brought out his private sketchbooks, showing her designs that had never been realized for lack of funding. She in turn showed him projections and market analysis on her tablet that demonstrated a profound understanding of the global luxury market. A bond of mutual respect and understanding was forged over that small, felt-covered table. He saw in her not a bored society wife looking for a vanity project, but a shrewd, visionary businesswoman who understood the heart of his craft. "Why, Miss Beaumont?" he finally asked, his gaze direct. "You could invest in anything. Technology, real estate." "Why us?" Caroline paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because in a world of disposable trends and fleeting fashions, people are starved for things that are real. Things with history, with soul. Your work is real, Mr. Dubois. And I believe the future belongs to those who create things that last." There was another more personal reason, a burning coal of anger and purpose in her heart, but she kept that to herself. By the end of the meeting, they had the framework of an agreement. The lawyers would handle the details, but the partnership was sealed with a handshake. Caroline Beaumont, the silent, invisible wife, was now the primary investor and silent power behind one of the most exclusive jewelry houses in the world. As she was leaving, a thought struck her. "Mr. Dubois," she said, turning at the door, "have you by any chance recently crafted a pair of large, custom-designed diamond earrings? Perhaps for a client named Richard Ashford." Antoine Dubois's professional discretion was absolute, but a flicker of recognition in his eyes was all the confirmation she needed. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "We create many unique pieces for our clients, Miss Beaumont. Each one tells its own story." "I'm sure it does," Caroline replied, a slow, cold smile touching her lips for the first time that day. "I look forward to hearing all about it." She stepped out into the afternoon sun, a new sense of power humming in her veins. Richard was playing a short game, driven by ego and lust. He was buying a trinket. She had just bought the entire kingdom. The stage for the anniversary gala was now set, and she would be the one directing the final act. The evening of the 20th anniversary, the night of the Children's Foundation Gala, arrived with a palpable sense of dread and anticipation. The air in the penthouse was thick with unspoken words. Richard was in high spirits, humming to himself as he adjusted his tuxedo in the mirror. To him, this was a triumphant night, a celebration of his public success and marital longevity, a dual victory he could display for all the world to see. He was oblivious to the seismic shift that had occurred in his own home, under his own roof. He turned to Caroline, who was sitting at her vanity, fastening a simple strand of pearls around her neck. She was wearing a midnight blue gown by Oscar de la Renta. It was understated elegant and classic, the very uniform he expected of her. "You look beautiful, darling," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. He placed a rectangular box, wrapped in the iconic robin's egg blue of Tiffany & Co., on her dressing table. "Happy anniversary." Caroline looked at the box. It was precisely what he had suggested, what he had deemed reasonable. It was a gift chosen, not with thought or love, but with the efficiency of an executive delegating a task. It was a symbol of their entire relationship for the past decade, a beautiful, expensive, and utterly hollow gesture. She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, was a diamond pendant necklace. It was lovely, of course, a flawless pear-shaped diamond on a delicate platinum chain. Any woman would have been thrilled. But to Caroline, it felt like a consolation prize, a corporate bonus for 20 years of service. It was a gift for Mrs. Ashford, the asset, not for Caroline, the woman. "It's beautiful, Richard." "Thank you," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of quiet gratitude. She allowed him to fasten it around her neck, enduring the brief, cold touch of his fingers on her skin. She looked at their reflection in the mirror, the handsome, powerful husband, and the graceful, appreciative wife. They were a perfect couple, a perfect lie. "I told you I got myself something," Richard said, a boyish grin on his face. He held up his wrist, displaying a new Patek Philippe watch. The grand complications. Had to pull a few strings to get it. He was proud of the purchase, of his ability to acquire the unattainable. He saw it as a testament to his power. Caroline saw it as another glaring symptom of his self-obsession. Their anniversary, and his first thought was a gift for himself. The ride down in the elevator was silent. Caroline could feel the cold weight of the necklace against her skin, a constant reminder of the charade she was performing. Richard, meanwhile, was scrolling through his phone, a small, secretive smile playing on his lips. He was probably texting her, sending a message to Scarlett, who would almost certainly be at the gala. Women like Scarlett didn't miss an opportunity to see and be seen, especially on an occasion that would allow her to subtly flaunt her connection to a man like Richard. Caroline was counting on it. The gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the magnificent Temple of Dendur. The room was a glittering sea of New York's high society. Politicians, titans of industry, and philanthropists mingled under the watchful eyes of ancient Egyptian gods. The air buzzed with conversation, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the soft strains of a string quartet. Richard was in his element, moving through the crowd with an easy confidence, shaking hands, clapping backs, and accepting congratulations on his anniversary. Caroline was at his side, the perfect, smiling accessory. She accepted the well-wishes with grace, her composure a mask of steel. People commented on their wonderful marriage, calling them an institution. Caroline wondered what they would think if they knew the institution was built on a foundation of lies and was currently in foreclosure. They took their seats at their table front and center. It was a power table occupied by Richard's business partner, Thomas Sterling, and his wife, along with a prominent city councilman. The conversation was a predictable mix of market talk and city politics. Caroline contributed little, offering quiet smiles and nods at the appropriate moments. Her focus was elsewhere. She scanned the room, her eyes coolly searching the crowd. It didn't take long to find her. Scarlett Vance made her entrance, late a classic power move designed to ensure all eyes were on her. She was wearing a shockingly red backless dress that clung to her like a second skin. She was a siren in a sea of tasteful neutrals. She wasn't seated at a prominent table, but at a smaller one off to the side, likely paid for by a junior corporate sponsor. But she positioned herself to have a direct line of sight to Richard. Caroline saw the moment Richard noticed her. A brief flicker in his eyes, a slight tightening of his jaw. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod in Scarlett's direction. A secret acknowledgement, an invisible thread connecting them across the crowded, glittering room. Scarlett's smile was triumphant. She slowly lifted a hand to brush a stray curl from her face, a seemingly innocent gesture. But it was calculated. It was designed to draw every eye to her earlobe. And there, catching the light from the massive chandeliers, was the brilliant, unmistakable fire of a diamond. A large, spectacular, custom-designed diamond earring. The appetizer course arrived, a delicate concoction of chilled lobster and avocado mousse. Caroline picked up her fork, her hand perfectly steady. She took a small, deliberate bite. The performance was nearly over. The audience was seated. The players were all in position. The final act was about to begin, and she was holding the curtain rope. All she had to do was wait for the perfect moment to pull it. The cold fury in her heart was a banked fire ready to erupt into an inferno. The evening wore on, a symphony of polite conversation and forced smiles. The main course was served, speeches were made, and pledges were announced. Through it all, Caroline was a portrait of serene composure, while a silent, high-stakes drama played out across the room. She was acutely aware of the furtive glances exchanged between her husband and Scarlett Vance. She saw the smug satisfaction on Scarlett's face, the way she angled her head, just so ensuring the magnificent diamonds dangling from her ears caught the light with every turn. They were, Caroline had to admit, breathtaking. Two flawless pear-cut diamonds of immense size, surrounded by a halo of smaller stones, designed to look like twin comets. They were unique, audacious, and impossibly expensive. They were a declaration. Richard emboldened by the wine, and the public adoration was growing careless. His attention drifted from the conversation at his own table, his eyes drawn again and again towards the splash of crimson across the room. Thomas Sterling's wife, a perceptive woman named Patricia, noticed. She shot Caroline a quick, questioning look, filled with sympathy. Caroline gave nothing away, offering only a placid smile in return. The moment she had been waiting for arrived after dessert. It was the part of the evening when guests were encouraged to mingle to network and admire the silent auction items displayed around the temple. It was the perfect chaotic cover for a confrontation. As if on cue, Scarlett Vance stood up. With a predator's instinct, she began to move through the room, her path weaving a deliberate, slow-burning fuse directly towards their table. She stopped to chat with a few people, her laughter a little too loud, her gestures a little too grand, all while drawing ever closer. Richard saw her coming. A flicker of panic crossed his face, quickly masked by a veneer of nonchalance. He tried to steer the conversation with the councilman, to create a fortress of dialogue she wouldn't dare penetrate. But Scarlett was not one for subtlety. She arrived at their table, a champagne flute in her hand. "Richard, darling," she purred, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "I almost didn't see you over here." She completely ignored Caroline, her eyes locked on Richard. Richard's face tightened. "Scarlett, good to see you. You know my business partner, Thomas Sterling, and Councilman Roberts." He made the introductions curtly, a desperate attempt to keep the interaction professional. Of course. "A pleasure," Scarlett said, though she barely glanced at the other men. Her gaze then fell upon Caroline, as if noticing her for the first time. "Oh, and you must be Mrs. Ashford. Richard has told me so little about you. The insult was deliberate, a perfectly aimed dart." Before Caroline could respond, Scarlett made her move. She laughed a light tinkling sound, and once again touched her ear. "It's just so lovely to see philanthropy thriving in this city. It allows one to bring out their very best pieces. A dear, dear friend of mine is just so incredibly generous. He insisted I wear these tonight. Aren't they just spectacular?" She leaned forward slightly, giving everyone at the table an unmissable view of the earring. It blazed under the lights, a fiery testament to Richard's betrayal and her victory. The table fell silent. Thomas Sterling looked down at his plate, deeply uncomfortable. The councilman cleared his throat. Richard's face was a mask of pale, frozen horror. He was caught. Publicly and humiliatingly caught. Scarlett's smile was a triumphant, venomous slash. She had won. In that heart-stopping moment of tension, a figure approached their table. It was Antoine Dubois, the jeweler, looking distinguished in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He moved with a quiet authority that commanded attention. Scarlett's eyes lit up further. She clearly expected the creator of her magnificent trophies to acknowledge her, to validate her status in front of this powerful audience. She thought he was coming to admire his handiwork on its new owner. But Mr. Dubois' eyes did not even flicker in her direction. He walked past Scarlett, as if she were a piece of furniture, his focus entirely on the other side of the table. He stopped beside Caroline's chair. Then he did something that sent a shock-wave through the assembled company. He bowed. Not a simple nod, but a deep, formal, respectful bow from the waist. It was a gesture of deference one might offer to royalty. The room, which had been buzzing with conversation, seemed to fall silent in their immediate vicinity. Everyone at the table and those nearby stared, utterly bewildered. Richard looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Scarlett's triumphant smirk faltered, replaced by a mask of confusion. Mr. Dubois straightened up and addressed Caroline, his voice clear and resonant, carrying easily in the sudden quiet. "Miss Beaumont," he said, using her maiden name with deliberate emphasis. "Good evening. It is an honor to see you here tonight. I trust everything with our new venture is to your satisfaction." Richard's jaw went slack. Ms. Beaumont, new venture Caroline, who had remained perfectly still throughout the entire exchange, finally looked up at the jeweler. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. "Mr. Dubois," she replied, her voice calm and clear as a bell. "It is always a pleasure. Your leadership and vision are everything I had hoped for. Our primary investor couldn't be more pleased." "Primary investor?" The words dropped into the silence like stones into a deep well. Richard stared at his wife, a dawning, sickening horror spreading across his face. He connected the name Beaumont to the little nest egg he had so long dismissed. He connected Dubois to the earrings he had denied her, and the very different ones now being flaunted by his mistress. The blood drained from his face. Caroline then turned her cool, steady gaze from Mr. Dubois to Scarlett. Her eyes flicked deliberately to the glittering earrings. "And your work," Caroline continued, her voice laced with a fine, sharp edge of steel, "is as always exquisite. You truly create the most unique, one-of-a-kind pieces. In fact, I believe I recognize the design of those earrings." "The twin supernovas. Wasn't that what we called them in the design brief?" She looked back at Mr. Dubois. "A custom order for one of your more impulsive clients, I presume?" The penny dropped. The implication was brutal, unmistakable, and utterly devastating. Caroline hadn't just invested in the company, she owned it. She had personally seen and approved the design of the very earrings her husband had bought for his mistress. The gift that was meant to be Scarlett's ultimate trophy was in fact a product of the woman she had sought to humiliate. Scarlett's face, moments before, flushed with victory, crumpled. The magnificent diamonds suddenly seemed like cheap glass symbols, not of her triumph, but of her utter foolishness. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. Antoine Dubois, the consummate professional, simply nodded. "Indeed, Miss Beaumont. As our majority shareholder, your eye for detail is as ever impeccable." Caroline gave a final serene smile that did not reach her eyes. She looked directly at her husband, at the ruins of the man who had underestimated her for 2 decades. The silence that followed was more damning than any scream, more complete than any accusation. In the heart of Manhattan's elite, in front of his partners and peers, Richard Ashford had been spectacularly, silently, and completely checkmated. The drive back to the Park Avenue penthouse was a journey through a frozen, silent hell. Richard sat rigid in the back of the Maybach, his face ashen, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on his knees. Caroline sat opposite him, not beside him, looking calmly out the window at the blurred city lights. The Tiffany necklace he had given her feeling like a cheap collar she couldn't wait to remove. The air in the car was so thick with tension it was barely breathable. The chauffeur, a man who had been with them for a decade, kept his eyes glued to the road, pretending he couldn't feel the Arctic chill emanating from the back seat. The moment the penthouse door clicked shut behind them, the silence shattered. "What the hell was that?" Richard's voice was a ragged whisper, a choked explosion of disbelief and fury. "Beaumont primary investor, what game are you playing?" Caroline walked calmly to the bar, not to pour a drink, but simply to create distance to take control of the space. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "It's not a game, Richard. It's business, a concept I thought you of all people would understand." "Business?" He repeated, his voice rising to a shout. "You bought Dubois & Co. With what money? Your little inheritance. My little inheritance, as you so condescendingly called it for 20 years, has been managed rather effectively," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. My portfolio under the Beaumont Trust happens to be considerably larger and more diverse than the portfolio of Ashford Equity. I am, in fact, one of the primary underwriters for the debt your company took on for the Horizon acquisition. The deal you told me was handled. He stared at her as if she had just grown a second head. The edifice of his superiority, the central pillar of his entire existence, was crumbling to dust before his eyes. He wasn't just married to a woman he had cheated on, he was financially beholden to her. You're my creditor. He stammered the words catching in his throat. Among other things, she said coolly, I am your wife. I am your biggest investor. And I am the majority shareholder of the establishment where you purchased those vulgar earrings for your little friend. The twin supernovas. An ironic name, don't you think, for something that caused such a spectacular explosion. The fight went out of him, replaced by a desperate, pathetic attempt at damage control. Caroline, listen. Scarlett, she meant nothing. It was a mistake, a stupid, foolish mistake. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can sell the shares back. Caroline held up a hand, and the sheer authority in the gesture silenced him. No, Richard. We will not be doing anything. I will be making some changes. The time for therapy and forgiveness passed months ago, probably years. You didn't just cheat on me. You disrespected me. You dismissed me. You treated me like a decorative object while you spent our life, our time on someone else. You belittled my intelligence while I was quietly building an empire you couldn't even fathom. She walked over to him, stopping just a few feet away. For the first time, he seemed to truly see her, not as the placid wife, but as the formidable power she was. He visibly shrank under her gaze. Here is what is going to happen, she said, her voice now hard as diamond. Tomorrow morning, my lawyers will be in touch with yours. We will begin divorce proceedings. You will not contest it. You will not fight me on the division of assets because, as we've established, most of them are already mine. Your position at Ashford Equity is now precarious. As your primary creditor, I will be calling an emergency board meeting to review your leadership and personal indiscretions, which now pose a significant risk to the company's reputation and stability. His face went white. She was not just leaving him. She was gutting him. She was taking everything his company, his reputation, his name. You would ruin me, he whispered aghast. No, Caroline corrected him. You ruined yourself. I am simply restructuring a failing asset. She used his own brutal corporate language against him, and the blow landed with precision. As for Scarlett Vance, her fate was sealed that night. Her phone, which had been buzzing with messages from gleeful society gossips, went silent. The next day she was fired from her job for unprofessional conduct. The dear, dear friend, who had been so generous, was now the source of her complete social and professional implosion. The twin supernovas, which she couldn't afford to keep and couldn't bear to look at, became her scarlet letter. In the weeks that followed, Caroline moved with the swift, merciless efficiency Richard had once admired in himself. She moved out of the penthouse and into a stunning new apartment in her own name. The divorce was swift and silent on her end, a brutal dismantling on his. Richard was forced to step down as CEO of Ashford Equity, replaced by a steely executive handpicked by Caroline. He was left with a fraction of his former wealth and a reputation in tatters. Caroline Ashford ceased to exist. In her place, Caroline Beaumont emerged a new and powerful force in the city's financial and cultural landscape. She took an active public role as the chairwoman of Dubois & Co., transforming it from a boutique atelier into a global luxury powerhouse, all while retaining its artistic soul. She was seen, she was heard, and she was respected. The quiet, silver-blonde woman who once stood silently by her husband's side was now on the cover of Forbes magazine. She never sought revenge in a loud or vulgar way. Her victory was in the life she built from the ashes of her old one. Her power wasn't in the destruction of Richard, but in her own magnificent creation. She had been trapped in a gilded cage, and instead of waiting for someone to open the door, she had simply bought the whole zoo. Caroline Beaumont's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most underestimated. It's a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about shouting the loudest, but about strategic patience, hidden intelligence, and knowing precisely when to make your move. She transformed her pain not into bitter revenge, but into a catalyst for reclaiming her own power, rewriting her narrative from a footnote in her husband's story to the stunning headline of her own. Her victory wasn't just in exposing a betrayal, but in building an empire on the very ground where she had been dismissed. If you were captivated by Caroline's journey from a silent partner to a reigning queen, and if you believe in the power of turning all the tables, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this story with anyone who needs a reminder of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of justice, empowerment, and unexpected triumphs. Thank you for listening.